Bernie Sanders is taking a lot of flack for tweeting out what some perceive to be an attack on Elizabeth Warren. And I'll be honest, I don't personally think that this tweet is controversial at all. With that being said, though, I do want to proceed cautiously here because the people who were outraged over this weren't the usual bad faith actors who are trying to go out of their way to interpret whatever Bernie Sanders says in the most negative way possible. Like, there were some people on our side, allies who support Bernie Sanders, who also said, look, I don't think this is a good look for Bernie Sanders, and I don't think he is proceeding about this in the right way. Now, to be fair, I think that Bernie Sanders should have been more clear here, but I think that what's missing here and why some people, even supporters of Sanders, took issue with this is because there's a lot of context that's missing here. So, to talk about what started this all was a tweet from Politica where they shared an article and added the caption, "Centrists are coming around to Elizabeth Warren as an alternative to Bernie Sanders." Now, the article is about how Wall Street-backed third-way Democrats are starting to warm to Warren, not necessarily because they agree with her politically, but because they kind of view her as a more palatable alternative to Bernie Sanders, and they view her as the lesser of evils if someone is going to win who's progressive, because it looks like there's a lot of left-wing momentum currently, so they kind of see someone who's on the left as inevitable if Joe Biden isn't able to pull it off. So what it seems like the article is communicating here is that third way is saying, all right, if we've got to go with anyone, Warren is the better progressive if our arms will be twisted here. Now, here's why they say they prefer Warren to Sanders. One is a democratic capitalist narrative, said Matt Bennett, a co-founder of Third Way, a centrist think tank that convened a conference of party insiders in South Carolina this week designed to warn about the risks of a nominee whose views are out of the political mainstream. The other is a socialist narrative. So in other words, if we have got to pick between someone, I guess we could strategically get behind Warren because at least she's still a self-proclaimed capitalist, whereas Bernie Sanders is a self-avowed socialist, and we just can't back that. They also argue that they don't think Bernie Sanders would be electable against Donald Trump specifically because of that socialist label. Now, additionally, here's what they also say in this article about centrist support for Warren. It's a sign of how the ideological lanes of the 2020 primary have blurred and overlapped, and of the steady progress Warren is making as a candidate. But it's also a statement on Bernie Sanders, Warren's top rival for progressive votes. Sanders continues to face significant resistance from within the party, and nowhere more so than among the moderates and establishment players who blanch at his talk of democratic socialism. Establishment and moderate Democrats haven't necessarily been won over to Warren's camp yet. Many still point to the former Vice President Joe Biden as their preferred candidate, but the tensions that once marked Warren's relationship with moderate Democrats have begun to dissipate as she methodically lays out her agenda and shows a folksier, more accessible side that wasn't always apparent in her role as a blue state senator and progressive icon. So they're saying, all right, since Warren is surging and she may be our best bet to defeat Bernie, she's the lesser of those two evils, and we'd rather back her than Bernie. That's kind of what I saw here, but there's a couple of takeaways from this article. First of all, if you are even remotely palatable to the Wall Street-backed third-way Democratic wing, then you're just not radical enough for me. You're just not radical enough for me, and I think it's because they realize that even if Elizabeth Warren is substantially, to the left of someone like Joe Biden, the comparison between her and Bernie Sanders is still meaningful because Bernie wants to fundamentally change the system, whereas Elizabeth Warren, even though she does want to make some drastic changes, she still wants to work within the parameters of capitalism and won't do too much to upset the establishment and overturn the apple cart, so to speak. So in response to this article, in response to the reality that third-way Democrats feel more comfortable, unsurprisingly, with Warren than Bernie Sanders, this is what he said. The cat is out of the bag. The corporate wing of the Democratic Party is publicly, quote, anybody but Bernie. They know our progressive agenda of Medicare for all, breaking up big banks, taking on drug companies, and raising wages is the real threat to the billionaire class. Now, what happened is immediately after he tweeted this out, people took offense to this because they thought that, oh, well, Bernie Sanders now, he's even lumping Elizabeth Warren in with the corporate wing of the Democratic Party, specifically because he tweeted out this article that was very heavily about Warren. But in actuality, it was really more about Bernie Sanders in the sense that Third Way is just detailing who is a bigger threat to them. And it's obviously Bernie, hence why they're opting for Warren, or they're trying to get more comfortable with the idea of Warren becoming the nominee. But even people who are on our side who support Bernie pointed out that they weren't too happy here. So this is what Waleed Shahid tweeted out. If we had a multi-party parliament, it'd be pretty normal for Sanders and Warren to campaign against each other for leadership in a social democratic party. That said, I still find this move pretty disappointing and unnecessary. Draw contrasts if you want, but not like this. No, I think that the reason why Waleed Shahid, who was an ally to progressives, instinctively kind of came out against Bernie here is because, he misread what Bernie was trying to say. What Bernie was trying to say wasn't necessarily something about Elizabeth Warren. His tweet was only tangentially about Warren. He was saying that Third Way views me as a threat, and they literally would opt for anyone over me, including another lefty like Elizabeth Warren. That's what Bernie Sanders was saying, and as this was explained more thoroughly to Waleed Shahid, he kind of came around. So, for example, a New York Times journalist gave him some more perspective here and explained that at a Third Way conference that he just attended last week, they were literally talking about how Warren is more palatable because she's not as far to the left as Bernie, because she's moving away from Medicare for All, which is a relief to them because let's remember, these Third Way corporate Democrats have a lot of health industry donors. So if Elizabeth Warren will preserve that system, then obviously that's going to be more preferable to them. And Waleed Shahid even pointed out after that, Elizabeth Warren's stance on Medicare for All is in fact inferior to Bernie's and even inferior to Kamala's, believe it or not. So what Bernie was ultimately speaking to here was the threat level. That's it. I get that he should have been more clear, and I think he knows that he should have been more clear because after he put out this tweet, his team clarified almost immediately. So as Tina Wynn of Vanity Fair reports, as Sanders' tweet began to make the rounds, his campaign rushed to clarify that it had been aimed not at Warren, but at centrist Democrats like Third Way, whose executive vice president of public affairs, Matt Bennett, declared last October that he would support any Democrat nominee with the exception of Senator Sanders. We're open to everybody except for him. So it wasn't an attack on Warren. With that being said, Bernie Sanders has to be extra cautious in the way he words things. Because at this point, he's got to realize that there are so many bad faith actors who want to bring him down that they're going to look for reasons to attack him. So he's got to make sure that if he's going to say something like this and respond to an article that heavily references Elizabeth Warren, he should do so in a way that makes it seem as if, he's not referencing her, he's referencing Third Way Democrats. Now, I'm sure he thought that he made that clear, but you've got to go a step further to make sure that, you're squeaky clean, because there's so many bad faith actors that want to smear Bernie Sanders as someone who's an aggressive Bernie bro, who's trying to go after someone who is progressive. And if, Elizabeth Warren is too much of a corporate Democrat for Bernie, then, who isn't a corporate Democrat? The only person who's not a corporate Democrat is Bernie, in his view. That's essentially what they're going to try to do. That's kind of what we saw. So Bernie does need to, not to pick on Bernie, but he does need to try to be more clear here and word things more clearly and try to not step on the landmines that are being set for him. That being said, I thought it was obvious that he wasn't referencing Warren and trying to attack Warren or besmirch her character and call her a corporate Democrat. But with that being said, I think the fact that allies, people on our side, took it that way means he should have probably been a little bit more clear. But, there were, of course, bad faith actors that did try to capitalize on this situation. And there's a lot of people who support Bernie Sanders, like myself, who instinctively defended him here because we know what he was trying to say, and we know the establishment and Third Way corporate Democrats are against him. So we came to his defense. Now, because we defended him, because Bernie supporters defended him, other people who are bad faith actors decided to chime in. For example, multi-millionaire Chrissy Teigen said that as a result of Bernie Sanders supporters defending him here. Quote, Bernie supporters will be the downfall of Bernie. I don't even hate him, but you guys are absolutely insufferable. Do him a favor and stop being so combative against Democratic criticism. Now, I don't know much about Chrissy Teigen's politics. I don't even know if she's genuinely on the left. I know she's anti-Trump, but I mean, she, in 2011, advocated for a Republican. I don't know if that was a tacit endorsement of Mitt Romney, but I don't even know if she realizes why people are so passionately supporting and defending Bernie Sanders. But I pointed this out to her, and my response to that was, Bernie supporters know he's the only candidate that wants to fundamentally change the system that's killing them. So hopefully you can understand why peasants often vocally defend him against bad faith attacks. Looking forward to taking your wealth, Chrissy Teigen. Now, if you follow me on Twitter, you know that I often like to tell celebrities that piss me off that I want to take their wealth, because I do. Because I hate capitalism, and I hate that it allows these rich assholes to rich-splain to us peasants and tell them, you're being insufferable for defending a candidate who's always prone to these bad faith attacks by the establishment. It's just infuriating. But going forward, I do hope that Bernie Sanders is a little bit more careful. Even if I knew what he was talking about here and what he was referencing here, I think that he gave his haters enough ammunition to where they could potentially, remove the context from this situation or misread what he's trying to say and view this as an attack, against Elizabeth Warren. And even if they know that maybe he's not necessarily trying to attack Elizabeth Warren, the mainstream media has a vested interest in getting him and Elizabeth Warren to exchange blows, because that's what's going to generate views and clicks. But I don't think that Bernie and Warren should be taking shots at each other during the primary. If it comes down to a race between just him and her, then I think it's perfectly reasonable for them to really draw these comparisons, because they really are different, right? They're different on a number of issues. Elizabeth Warren is horrible when it comes to foreign policy, for the most part. Elizabeth Warren is terrible when it comes to healthcare, because she is wishy-washy on Medicare for all. However, I think Bernie needs to be more clear, and I think that as his supporters, we have to try to listen to our allies, because even if people, took issue with this, try to understand, like from the perspective of someone like Waleed Shahid, I don't think he's a bad faith actor. So I think that we should try to explain to them why Bernie Sanders said this and give him more context, because what this is about is something that we all know about and have seen over the years, that the establishment is out to get Bernie Sanders. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's a fact, because if you go against moneyed interests and the powers that be, you're going to make yourself a target. FDR was a target, right? So Bernie Sanders knows that he's a target. He knows that with him doing what he's doing, advocating for, a fundamental change to the system, he's going to make himself a target. We know that as well. We just have to try to engage with allies rather than shooting them down. And I think that Stedman on Twitter did that with Waleed and really explained to him where Bernie Sanders was coming from.
Subscribe if you like this video, folks. Mike's tremendous, and he's doing a really, really good job. Many people are telling me about how wonderful the Humanist Report is. Bigly.